Welcome to everyone tuning in. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes as we wait for everybody to join. All right, it looks like we've reached some critical mass here, so we can get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Today's event is about the value of historically Black colleges and universities. Our host is Strada Education Network. I'm Sarah Weissman, a reporter at Inside Higher Ed, and I cover HBCUs, minority serving institutions, and community colleges, among other topics. I often hear from HBCU leaders that these are institutions that punch above their weight. They graduate up to 50% of Black doctors and attorneys, 40% of Black engineers and Black members of Congress, and 80% of Black judges in the country. They're known for fostering a unique sense of security, community, and belonging among Black students and alumni, and they consistently do so with significantly less state funding and much smaller endowments than their peers. The role of HBCUs as a support system and an engine of social mobility for Black students has perhaps been especially apparent during the pandemic, as these colleges serve some of the hardest hit students. Black students and their families have disproportionately suffered from high rates of infection and job loss related to the pandemic. A 2020 survey from the Hope Center found that more than half of HBCU students were housing insecure, and a fifth had been homeless that year. HBCUs in general enroll double the percentage of low-income students compared to other institutions. And many HBCUs creatively used federal COVID-19 relief funds to address critical needs among their students during this time. We're going to be discussing the value of HBCUs at a time when these institutions are experiencing renewed appreciation and support, but also renewed threats. After a national reckoning with racism following the killing of George Floyd, HBCUs experienced a surge of funding and support from some philanthropists and lawmakers. The Washington Post also recently reported that at a time when many colleges and universities are experiencing enrollment declines, some HBCUs have had some notable enrollment increases. At the same time, HBCUs have had to continue educating their students amid dozens of bomb threats in the last 2 months. Today, we'll start our time together by hearing about new research from Strada Education Network and the Urban Institute Center on Education Data and Policy. The research explores how the experiences and post-graduation outcomes of Black students at HBCUs differ from their peers at other institutions. Following an overview of these insights from the research by Dave Clayton from Strada Education Network, we'll have an insightful discussion with our panelists today who bring us some on-the-ground perspectives. Our panelists are going to be Tony Allen, president of Delaware State University, and Marian Ross Frederick, president of Albany State University. And just a little housekeeping, we encourage your engagement. You can put questions in the Q&A throughout the event, and I will direct some of them to our panelists toward the end of our discussion. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Clayton.
Thank you, Sarah. And my particular thanks to President Allen and President Frederick for their leadership, for their counsel to Strada. Our board made a commitment last year in 2020 to do something, right, in this time of change and challenge for our communities of color. And so with their advice and the participation of President Frederick and President Allen and their peers, we developed a Strada Scholars Initiative. So we're trying to not only study and help others see the strengths and opportunities with HBCUs, but to contribute to supporting their leadership in serving students on their campuses every day. So I'm humbled, really, to be with you and with you as an audience today who care about these issues and understanding what we can do to serve the leaders of our communities tomorrow for the future. We collected, I'll share insights from 3 large studies today. One of them is nationally representative, and we opened up that database of 350,000 telephone interviews to the Urban Institute, and Dr. Dominique Baker of Southern Methodist University and Erica Blom at Urban Institute took that data set and started exploring to look at racial differences in the college experience by race and ethnicity. And so that paper was released by the Urban Institute earlier this month. And as you go through that paper, there's one thing that many things of interest. One clear finding that emerged that is the springboard for our conversation today is the ratings of satisfaction by the type of institution attended. And so you'll see this key graph that's pulled out from their Urban Institute report, where you see this stronger feeling of those who attended HBCUs that they had a better experience in that prepares them to be an attractive job candidate. And they received a high quality education and this notion of learning important skills that they use in day-to-day life. And even though HBCUs enroll twice as many Pell eligible and low income students, and we think of debt loads and burdens, these are the individuals who are the very most likely to say, my education is worth the cost. So this just all points to there's something powerful that takes place in our nation's HBCUs. And I do think of them as our nations, as they serve all of us directly or indirectly in the strength they provide. And so we wanted to explore. So there are 2 other data sets you'll see insights from today. One is an outcomes survey. We have a survey of alumni with nationally representative benchmarks, but also 60 individual schools have participated and surveyed their alumni. And so we've polled Black students who've attended HBCUs or non-HBCUs to look at their differences in their perceptions. These are really exploratory analyses because they're not representative of all HBCUs. They're the schools that participated, right? So it's skewed a little bit. So look at these and we try to focus on meaningful differences that point us to things for further exploration and investigation, but show us and give us all some clues to support what we may feel or observe in our daily work. Similarly, with the National Survey of Student Engagement, we piloted and sponsored NESI to develop a career preparation module last year where 55,000 students, first year students and seniors, took that module. So of those 98 US institutions, we polled the Black students who attended and we looked at who attended HBCUs, non-HBCUs, et cetera. So again, not a representative sample of current students, but a large sample, and we'll start to try and focus on areas for us as a field collectively to explore and understand. So just a little bit of caveat and context on where these data come from today. We looked at this question of, we asked individuals in focus groups as well as in those telephone interviews of what was the main reason you pursued education? Why did you go on for additional education and enroll in college? And so then we took those that you see here and put them into a survey and asked people to agree or strongly agree if, to what extent does this describe why you attended and how well was your experience fulfill these aspirations? And again, consistently, you see the strength of Black alumni from HBCUs versus non-HBCUs. And if you think about becoming the best person I can be and making more money and being able to support myself and or my family, you just see these 10 percentage point gaps or bumps, 20 percentage point bumps in the affirmation of the outcomes from their perspective of Black HBCUs. So it speaks again to the power of something they're experiencing in that HBC community and education. When we look at their experience and the value of their education experiences, again, professors, classes, mentoring, The one place where they come in lower than their non-HBCU peers would be in the research experience. And as we think about maybe some discussion later with President Allen, President Federick about the funding and the research infrastructure that's available and those types of things. What I also want you to know that's not on this slide is where you look at the value of professors and the kind of agree and strong, extremely and very valuable. That number for the Black alumni of HBCUs is 5 percentage points higher for white alumni who attend non-HBCUs. And that number on mentoring is 8 percentage points higher than for white alumni at a non. So HBCUs are not only doing better by Black students compared to HBCUs, they're setting the pace for the field in the quality and strength of that service. On that research experience, that's a place where Black alumni are 11 percentage points lower than white students. So you think about that access to an R1 experience and the active research infrastructure and laboratories, and how we're really not providing equitable access to those opportunities to develop the talents that exist amongst our Black students throughout the country. When you think about skill development, we went into labor market postings and we identified the 10 most popular skills that are posted in job positions and nationwide. And we said, well, how well did your education help you develop these? And again, look at these differences on leadership there in the middle, and on teamwork, on creativity, on math, right? Across the board in every instance, Black alumni at HBCUs are doing better than Black alumni at not HBCUs from their perspective. They are also, if you look at verbal communication and teamwork and leadership, they're at least 10 to 15 percentage points better than their white peers at non-HBCUs. So again, setting the pace for the field. The places where white alumni at non-HBCUs are having stronger experiences, back perhaps to this infrastructure and research access, data analysis and project management experiences are not as strong, again, in this exploratory analysis. We think about how to better support and learn from the HBCU successes and strengths. We think about education as a means to an end, right? To transforming lives, to advancing lives, to being able to provide, to choose an occupation and a career and a place you want to live and a community you want to be a part of. The career advising experiences are stronger. Again, here, both relative to primary Black institutions and neither, as you see in this chart, but they're also stronger than for white alumni of non-HBCU skills. You know, in fact, career advising at over 70%, that number for whites at non-HBCUs is just under 50%. So, you know, significantly greater expression of appreciation of the value of the career advising and the applied learning experiences at these institutions. When we look at this closer connection to career exploration and career development, you look at these factors of I researched a career interest, I connected to a potential employer, explored the job market, or I learned about a career from a practicing professional, right? Not a staff member or career advisement or a faculty member even, but someone who is in the field and working. You see these strengths. And again, at least 10 percentage points higher for Black alumni at HBCUs than for white alumni at non-HBCUs. So tremendous strength here across the higher ed landscape that is, you know, a best in class delivery of service and mentoring and experience. We know that these are tremendously predictive of subjective outcomes and expressions of value and feeling education is worth the cost and as it goes forward. And then just one more slide. This is a big one, and it's not to memorize all the small font and the type, but this is just again to show this case where in every case that top line that is the blue is the Black alumni of HBCUs reporting more value and better experience. This is the current students, sorry, I said Black alumni, from the NESE career preparation module they're reporting more and better experience across this full range of connections between education and career following. So I hope I've highlighted today, and I don't need to read this slide with you, and I'll stop share and we can move to discussion, but I hope I've just highlighted for you. I was really struck by an overall theme here. When I think of powerful and transformative and successful education, you think of the financial capital, right? To make education accessible, to fund faculty, to fund institutions, to fund resources. You need, whether it's policy or private philanthropy, or you've got to have that. You need the social capital of the community of professionals and faculty and educators and the connection to alumni and employers, right? But you need the human capital of those individuals who are committed to and believe in the value of education and willing to invest themselves, their hopes, their dreams, their late nights, in many cases, loans and debt that they'll carry for years beyond. And in 2 years ago in June, we looked at the disruption of the pandemic, and we saw that Black and Latino students were nearly twice as likely to report that their plans for education had been disrupted or changed by the pandemic. They were also twice as likely to report that they intended to enroll, whether it was 3 months, 6 months, a year, or 2 months. That appetite, and the disruption of education, but that appetite in the human capital and the belief in the power of education is so strong in this community. And the HBCUs have just been tremendous in serving. Sarah said, punching above the weight from the perspective of HBCU leaders. I think we clearly see from the perspective of HBCU students and HBCU alumni that they have felt lifted in ways beyond what their peers would at other institutions. So my great thanks for Dr. Allen and Dr. Federick, who represent those leaders and those communities in our discussion today, but appreciate very much the good fortune we have at Strada to have this kind of data available and to be able to share it with you in the field. So thank you, Sarah. I'll turn it back to you to kind of help us have some discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clayton. There's certainly a lot to chew on there, a lot to discuss, and looking forward to our conversation together. And a friendly reminder to those listening, please feel free to send your questions our way in the Q&A section, and we will hopefully get to a few of them. And just to start, there's so much to talk about, but I feel like the research we saw today, it really highlights a lot of positive experiences of HBCU graduates. They're having valuable connections with their professors. They're having positive experiences with career advising. They're leaving their educations feeling prepared for a really wide range of skills in the labor market. And just to start with you, Dr. Federick, what's the secret sauce? What is it about an HBCU education that's different, that's creating these positive outcomes for Black students relative to their peers?
Thank you for that. And let me start by first saying thank you to Strada for this wonderful work. I think this is one of the ways we get our stories out, the stories of HBCUs that haven't been out there as well as we need to have them out there. So thank you for the study and the report. I think because of our mission, our stated mission to actually educate students, not in spite of their race, but because of their race, because of that stated mission, students come in without having to deal with some of the, what we've termed microaggressions. I think there are different terms for that, but they come inside our schools, not having to justify who they are or why they are as they are. They don't have to justify their educations, their backgrounds. They come in, and I think they have the opportunity, and we kind of envelope those students. They have the opportunity to start off at a very positive step. Whereas in some other institutions, it's going to be different. You have to justify who you are. And so I think when you can come in and eliminate some of that noise in the beginning, in that first year or that transfer year, I think our students get the opportunity to really dive into their greatness. They don't have to justify that. They get to come in and they get to start well. And I think our faculty and our staff, a lot of them are from HBCUs. They've graduated from HBCU, or they're sitting on the campus of an HBCU and understand that culture and the significance of what that culture means to students. that they are able to pull those students forward and get beyond that rudimentary, I just want to make sure you're safe, to really, I want to make sure you feel belong to the institution, and you have that self-realization. So I think we get a little bit of a jump start on helping our students to be the best that they can be on day one.
Really appreciate that point. And I think in my reporting, when I speak with HBCU students and alumni, the word I probably hear the most is safety, that there's sort of a unique sense of safety at HBCUs. Dr. Allen, anything to add to that?
Yes, before I begin, though, I want to say hello to my dear colleague, President Frederick. Good to see you as always.
Oh.
And certainly a big shout out to Strada for this work. I often say it's not the HBCUs that don't have great stories, we just don't have enough storytellers. So having the opportunity to be in this particular realm is an important one. And I do think Dr. Frederick hit on a lot of what you might consider that you actually can see in the working world between many HBCU alum and non-HBCU alum. I think you're going to find the HBCU alum feel much more confident, are ready to take more chances as it relates to their own career. Some of that means a bigger and better entrepreneurial spirit, and have this efficacy of to whom much is given, much is required. So the notion that they would reach back as they climb is a real important piece. And I know the research, and Dave knows as well, suggests that of all the factors that get a Black person from a low resource community to the middle class, of all the factors you can consider, going to an HBCU is chief among them. So that's not lost on us relative to how we not only think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you think of physical needs and safety needs, loving and belonging, esteem and self-actualization. I think we find ourselves sort of traversing loving and belonging, recognize that many of our students have concerns about physical and needs of safety, when we're trying to get them up to representing their whole self, actualizing what they actually can be. It really is not just a labor of love, but a call that we all have. And I don't mean just the presidents, everybody who's around a student at an HBCU. It is the disposition in which we work, and that's what makes it so important. Also makes it so difficult, but still continues to press us forward.
Thank you. And Dr. Clayton, anything to add to that? I know Strada did a year-long listening tour with HBCUs. That's a part of its recent initiative announced in October. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about sort of what makes an HBCU education unique.
I did work in Salinas County with the public health system there and the public hospitals. And Salinas County is where Grapes of Wrath was set, in east of Eden, and Monterey Peninsula and Pebble Beach is on one side, and then you have these growing fields where all of our produce comes from for all of us across the nation. And there were youth in those schools in that county who had never crossed what they call the lettuce curtain. Right? You have to drive 4 miles from the fields to Monterey Bay and the aquarium and the seals and the golf courses and and what you've never seen, you can't imagine. And so I think there's tremendous power in seeing peers who are ahead of you, who are seeing faculty, of seeing alumni who come back to campus and celebrate and rejoice and affirm the strength and quality of their lives. And so the combination of tremendously high quality professionals and educators who are devoted to you as an individual, and also the ability to see yourself a year ahead, 4 years ahead, 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead as a judge, as a doctor, as a nurse, as a teacher, right? That is just more powerful than we can imagine. We can all think of the people in our lives who helped us see something in ourselves that we didn't know was there. And so I think that combination of excellence, not just on campus, but demonstrating the excellence of our community and its extension through, along with the practice and the policy of connecting education to career and outcomes, is just remarkable, and it shows up in lots of different ways between the numbers that we look at, but it's very, very powerful.
What are sort of the broader socioeconomic ripple effects of the way in which HBCUs educate their students and prepare them for the workforce? What's sort of the socioeconomic footprint of the sector? We know there's a return on investment for students, but what are the returns for their families, for communities at large?
Is that a question for me, Sarah?
Yeah.
So I'll start. As I said, the primary factor to moving someone to the Black middle class is really attending an HBCU, matriculating and graduating. Having said that, just think about what that means as it relates to generational wealth. So the capacity for you all to not only get a good job and support your family, but also begin the business of valuing education for your children, grandchildren, et cetera, and having the assets associated with a good life matters. So I think it's really critical in that regard. The other thing I'd say, though, as a kind of an HBCU ecosystem, we actually don't give ourselves enough credit for what we provide to the broader community. Think of it this way: our contribution to the GDP every year as a system, so the entire HBCU community, $16 billion. 16 billion. So when you think about that contribution to the communities we serve, when we find ourselves often in low-resourced Black communities, and then what we are doing for many of the people that are in those communities as it relates to their own economic and social uplift, it really is a powerful formula. And then when you add this notion of giving back as you come through your own success, you can see why half of all Black graduates in the country since 1837 actually started and graduated from an HBCU.
Dr. Frederick, I'd also love to hear your thoughts on that, the sort of national impact of HBCUs.
Absolutely. And, as I always say, Dr. Allen always, he caps it off. But, the 50% of the doctors and Black attorneys, 40% of Black engineers, 80% of Black judges, those aren't the numbers that I focus on. It is really the hundreds of thousands of students who look up to them, communities that look up to them, people that they touch from various ways that really make that social impact just that much more important. It's those people that will look at them and say, hey, we could probably do something similar to that. As Dave said earlier, you can't be what you can't be what you're not seeing. And so when they see that, it makes a huge difference. I also think that for an HBCU like mine, 6,300 students, a lot of teachers, nurses, that come out of this institution. Those teachers are going to actually engage with students from K through 12 before they even get to college. And so they get the opportunity to frame their mindsets. They get the opportunity to frame how they think about learning and what they want to do in the next phase. I think that's where one of our largest social impacts actually happen, is in the classroom before you even get to college. That's what happens there. Our counselors that actually encourage our students to go to college, because we still have a lot of factors and variables that are out there in our world that tells them that that's not what they should do. That's not where they should be, that they don't deserve to be there. And so when we have those students that come out that can go into teaching, that are going to go into counseling, that will be the top principals, I think that's another social impact that we don't speak enough about. But they actually frame that next generation is going through school.
Excellent K through 12, especially as we have a teacher shortage and certainly a diverse teacher shortage.
Yep.
Dr. Clayton, anything to add to that?
No, thanks, Sarah. This is good discussion. We'll keep going.
Hey, Sarah, the only thing I'd add, though, I was just in LA last week visiting with an organization called the 1954 Project, which is specifically dedicated to more Black teachers in the classroom in K-12 education, and is doing some yeoman's work along those lines. And I was proud to be one of the representatives of the HBCU community that I believe will be a conduit for supporting that work. What Dr. Frederick said is so important. When you not only see the images of your principal or teacher in those classrooms, they often pluck you out of a certain situation and create opportunities that might not have ever come to you. I had an HBCU grad who was the principal of my junior high school that put me in a program that literally it paved my way to college because he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And I think you have seen that is the story of HBCUs in many respects, and why we're such an important asset to the American citizen.
And Dr. Allen, I would add into that, think about where we've been over the last 2 years with COVID and the impact and the pause that it's put on all of our students. Our teacher, I think about, we haven't even seen the impact that that's going to cause us later on, right? So we haven't even really started talking about that deeply. And so when I look at that student body that's gone through this and still going through, COVID, we're not done. And the impact on education is significant. And we've been through 2 years of really hard push to keep our students engaged. Now, what are we going to do for the next 5, 10 years as they're trying to get through high school? And so, those teachers that can, wrap their arms around those students and tell them that they do matter, especially when they may not have gotten that a little bit through these last 2 years. They're gonna be really important. They are important, but I think they'll continue to grow in that importance.
And I guess sort of building on discussing the pandemic, HBCUs have done sort of a lion's share of supporting some of the students sort of in the most need during COVID-19. And starting from a place of certain disparities, I think we see that reflected a little bit in the research shared today, that HBCU alumni were less likely to report feeling satisfied with research experiences or digital literacy skills. We know that HBCUs have often struggled to have up-to-date infrastructure, technology. And I guess we can start with you, Dr. Allen. What do you think accounts for some of those gaps, and what sorts of resources do HBCUs need to close them?
Hey, Sarah, to be blunt, systemic inequities account for a lot of those gaps, and there's no way to hide that. Even over the last couple of years, I think you all know that we've had a reasonable amount of infusion of dollars, both from private philanthropy and the federal government. That does not make up for all nearly 200 years of underinvestment in institutions that only represent 3% of all colleges and universities in the country, but to David's point, are still punching above our weight in every category, particularly as it relates to actually graduating Black students. Having said that, and Daryl Graham said it to us yesterday, I do want to start thinking much more from an asset model perspective as opposed to a deficit model. We do have a unique opportunity here now. If we're able to make the right investments, we will continue to grow substantively. And that has a lot to do with how we work together. Marion actually was one of the first people I called when we were thinking about acquiring Wesley College, which is a small private liberal college, 1.5 miles down the road from us. And I noted that she was a part of the process at Albany State. And that mattered because during the middle of a pandemic, folks just don't go acquire colleges. But we saw it as a unique opportunity to position ourselves, to Marion's point, for the next 5, 10, 15 years. Can we grow our footprint? Can we build our physical infrastructure? Can we gain more students? Are we there yet? Not by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that one of the blessings out of this crisis has been the time for us to think in a new way about how we are educating future generations. They want to consume our education in a different way. That's clear. It's not just the same old pedagogy. It's not always in-person learning. The notion of this virtual and hybrid learning we've had to go through, I think has taught us some lessons. And I don't mean HBCUs, I mean college universities in general. Those folks who learn those lessons are going to be prepared for the future. And I think that HBCUs in many respects over these last 2 years have not only learned them, but have executed in a way that represents the traditions of full service, wraparound supports for students to actually get to the finish line and walk across that stage.
Dr. Frederick, I'd also love to hear your thoughts on that.
And yeah, and I'm not sure if I have a lot to add to that. Infrastructure, absolutely. The lack of infrastructure. One of the things I'm hoping and trying to plan for is that the resources that have been provided to HBCUs over the last year and a half, they're not episodic, right? So we need it not to stop, because as Dr. Allen said, we have historical underfunding underway that we are trying to work through. And so I agree, we absolutely have to think about that asset model and how to build there. But we do have a lot of institutions that are so deep in the hole as they're trying to pull out through the funding that they've received. It's still going to take time. So I don't want people to pull back from how they've been supporting HBCUs, because we'll see the payoff. That's where your return on investment will come. That's how we're going to get better labs, better things for our faculty to actually do more research, better internships, those types of things that will help our students as they're going through our HBCUs. So, the door has been opened, and I want to, we're going to push really hard not to let it close. But that's something that's going to be really important for the future of our institutions.
I feel like you've both touched on this in your last responses, but it seems as if HBCUs have sort of found themselves in a national spotlight over the last couple of years. Policymakers who graduated from these institutions, like Vice President Kamala Harris, Senator Raphael Warnock, have come onto the national stage. There have been major donations to HBCUs from philanthropists like Mackenzie Scott. Do you think HBCUs are having something of a national moment? And is that moment fleeting? Is it a potential tide shift? How sustainable do you think that is? And I'll stick with you, Dr. Frederick.
So, I think it's absolutely sustainable, but it's a lot of work for us to do to make that happen. So it's not going to happen automatically. As Dr. Allen said earlier, it's not that we lack stories, it's that we've lacked storytellers. Our first HBCU was founded, 183 years ago. We're still sitting today with challenges that should have been basically put to bed decades ago. And so I hope it's not just a moment. I really do think for our sustainability, it has to not be a moment. We have to figure out how to make this our way of life, how to make the giving, the ask for the giving, how to invest in our institutions in a way that is always focused on sustainability and not just that deficit. We got to get rid of the deficit and figure how we build from there. Because if we have to start from ground zero every time something happens, there's no way to get ahead with that. There's just the math doesn't work. So I hope it's not a moment. I do think it's exhausting, frankly, to have to keep pushing to stay in the spotlight, but that's where we belong. And I think that's where our institutions have worked so hard and deserve to be there. We just got to figure out how to make it all happen.
Dr. Allen, anything to
Yeah,
add to that?
and I don't have a lot to add to President Frederick, because I think that's spot on. And I always say two things. One pandemic exposed another, right? So we were all sitting home with our families, not sure of how the next day would play out, and probably watching too much TV, and in my case, probably drinking a little too much wine. And then one day we all saw, black, white, brown, we all saw the murder of George Floyd. And I can tell you that we've had those kinds of experiences before, particularly in the Black community. So nobody in the Black community was all that surprised. But I think what was different was the white community and how they saw it in some ways for the first time. I remember lots of white allies called me just to check on how I was feeling, which was a first in many respects. So having that coronavirus pandemic expose what has been a pandemic throughout our country's history, the problem of the color line, I think has been important. But it's just, that is the moment. What we need to do now, to Dr. Frederick's point, is develop this movement, right? And that movement has to cut across all the things we know to be true, not only about our secret sauce, right? So not only how we have a special way of educating students, right? But also the challenges that are in front of us, which will demand that we do some things differently, that we change pedagogy, that we're much more contemporary in our philosophies, and we grow our businesses in a much different way for the future. And I've seen that certainly at Delaware State, but across the HBCU community, that we're thinking in that way too. And I think that that is the thing that's going to preserve us for the future. The only other thing I would say is the more we're able to collaborate together, HBCU to HBCU, so think of us as a system as opposed to a sector, we are much stronger together. And the fact that we have a little light on us now means that we not only have to tell that story, we have to have some expectations of why you need to make this investment, and that investment needs to be continuing.
And going off of that, I guess what are those expectations? What would be sort of solutions from policymakers in recognizing that unique value of HBCUs and sort of putting a sustainable spotlight as opposed to a fleeting spotlight on these institutions?
Well, you know, in my capacity as the chair of the White House Advisory Board on HBCUs, we have kind of 4 broad categories of interest. And I wrote a Dear Colleague letter to my colleagues in September and noted those 4. The first, Dr. Frederick spoke about, we have to have investment in our living and learning spaces. Infrastructure investments are, in my belief, are job one. That's because we've already gotten over quality education. We've proven that. This study that Dave just reviewed talks about outcomes and what that means for our students and their alum. We've proven that. So why don't we deserve the same quality of living and learning spaces given the outcomes that we're producing? So that's job one. Job two, as specifically relates to research, there are about 12 12 R2 HBCUs in the country. They're the highest classification, as you know, is R1. Not one of us are R1 institutions, which I think is a substantive mistake, because many of the issues and challenges and research questions that we all think about disproportionately affect our stakeholders, our student body, their families, their communities. So why shouldn't we be at the forefront of some of those solves? So really being able to create opportunities for us to have the capacity to take on broader work, particularly as it relates to research interest and alignment in the federal government, is critically important as well. Third, we've talked about, I've said this everywhere I go, I do believe that HBCUs are the best return on investment in higher education, period. And that's because we're taking students from low resource communities and transforming them into the middle class. Just think about what that does for our economy, our communities, and the like. And then the last, Dr. Frederick just also spoke on, we as an HBCU community are not all the same, right? No 2 HBCUs are the same. So our smaller set of institutions, so think of the Bennett's of the world, they need support too. And they need that support not only from the various stakeholders, federally, state, local, private philanthropy, they need it from their stronger sister institutions in the HBC community themselves. So we have to be speaking up as a collective, as opposed to always independently. So if we're able to even begin along the path, along those 4 paths, I think we can make tremendous strides. But everybody has to know where we are, that we're clear on our goals, and we understand what our expectations are and want people to meet them.
Dr. Frederick, anything to add to that? Anything on your policy wish list?
I think he covered it all. What he spoke to are so huge. You could do a whole dissertation on each one of those 4 items. And there's so much involved in there. I wouldn't add anything to them.
I might just observe in the group of us got together yesterday to just think about the hour we'd have, all of us today. The phrase pace and volume kept coming up, President Frederick and President Allen, and this notion of we can deliver, right? You look at the perspective of students and alumni and the outcomes in the field and all of those things, the quality is best in class. I mean, you're not just doing more with less, you're doing better than those who have more by the student's perspective. I mean, it's remarkable. And so now, if you've got the proof, how do you keep up with the pace and the volume of opportunity and need that our nation has? And that commitment to that, and how do we all partner, and what does that mean? I mean, that's right. Personally, individually, systemically, policy, it just has to come together.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's right. I would just say, particularly for our policymakers and some of our private philanthropists, you think about incubation from a volume perspective in the same way that you would, a venture capitalist would support a potential business venture, right? There are 101 good bets in the HBCU community. If you're able to provide them with real capital and support in a way that keeps them on par with similarly situated institutions, to your point, Dave, you already know how where the outcomes are going to go, right? And then it behooves us to take those investments and make strategic decisions to continue to grow ourselves. So it is a two-part answer, but that incubation part, I don't think we've ever been intentional about over the years. And now is the time to do that in earnest.
Audience questions, just because there are so many of them and so many good ones. It's really difficult to choose. But I guess to start, and we can start with you, Dr. Frederick. One question that one of our audience members asked was, what steps are HBCUs taking to recruit and provide financial support to Black students who are faced with the decision to utilize state financial support at a predominantly white institution versus attending an HBCU?
And so, I would say that part of that goes back to the high school, that equation as well. Those students that are in PWIs, non-HBCUs, we don't directly go to other schools to recruit those students away. Now, you probably see our recruiters on your campus, and so just know I'm the president and I wouldn't know any better. But at the end of the day, I think that the proposition that we offer to students attracts those students away. And so we would love for those students to be here, but guess what? It has to be the right fit. So not all Black students, they may not want what an HBCU offers. I think they should, but they may not want what HBCU offers. I think that we have to think through, again, the students that we are serving. And so if they've chosen to go to a different school, I believe in education. I just want them to I want them to graduate from a school. I would love for it to be an HBCU. And I think it's a different environment. It's a more nurturing environment at HBCUs. Our students see that, and that's why they come. That's why people transfer into HBCUs as well. They experience there in some of the PWIs when they go, they don't like that experience. And they make the decision themselves to come to an HBCU. So we recruit through that way. We recruit by saying, this is what we have to offer. You're welcome. And we get our students that way as well.
Dr. Allen, any thoughts on that recruitment piece?
Just the only thing I would add is pipelining. We spend a lot of time on our campuses going deeper in the talent pipeline for our students. You see that in summer camps. You see that in dual degree programs, early college. We have an early college high school where we're starting our students in the 9th grade. And I remember when I was a college student, I actually was an upward bound counselor at Lincoln University and saw what it meant for rising juniors and rising seniors to get the HBCU experience, and it really changed their decision and trajectory. The more we do that, the better off we are. The other thing I would say, there are still too many students who do not know the history of, the depth of, the volume of HBCUs in the country. And that is problematic on many levels, because when you show the opportunity, Dr. Frederick's point, sometimes the choice is so crystal clear that those students regret not having known that there was even an opportunity or there was even an institution like this. So I think some of the marketing you've seen from sports professionals and the like have helped tremendously, but there's a lot more work to do just to continue to expose students to the HBCU history and experience.
And I would also say, if you think about it as well, all the things that we've talked about earlier, right? Some of those things are obstacles to our recruitment. We students want to come to the places that are very well equipped, that they have the lab space and things like that. They have the co-curricular activities. Those things are important to students coming in today. So it all works together. It all works together. And as we're getting one bucket corrected, hopefully that will also improve with the recruitment part as well. And let me just also say, and the academic side would probably cringe as I'm saying this, but HBCUs also have an awesome ability through our athletics and other things to attract students. And so when you see those events, students get sometimes their first taste of an HBCU, but as Dr. Allen said, that's not the history, right? That's part of who we are, but that doesn't really speak to our full history, but at least it opens the door.
Hey, I do want to talk a little bit too about affordability, just quickly, as I think that's important. I think many educators in the room are likely thinking about that too. We have been very fortunate to have a scholarship for any graduating high school senior in Delaware with a 2.75 and a commitment to public service to have a full tuition 4-year scholarship at Delaware State University. It took us 10 years to get there. But to the point of the return on investment and the case we make, particularly to our respective state legislatures and our governor, I do think that the opportunity for us to afford students from whatever background and ability, those kinds of prescriptions for college success really open up the door in a way that we would have never imagined. And, it started with 10 years ago, it was a 2-year scholarship. And then 6 years ago, it was a 3-year scholarship, but it was only half tuition. And then just last year, we finally got that full tuition, and we're seeing the results dramatically and expect that will continue. So I would say to many of the HBCU leaders that are probably out there, those are the kind of things we should reasonably ask for as we are advocating for support among our respective communities.
One of our attendees asked, what are HBCUs doing now to get more support from the federal government? Dr. Allen, would you be interested in taking that?
Yeah, I laid out the objectives. I can say that the Biden administration, I think everybody knows I'm tied to the administration in many ways. I used to work for President Biden when he was a senator. So I do have a bias, but the facts speak for themselves. The acceleration and pace of the contributions from this administration to the HBC community are historic. I believe they will continue at that pace. And I think that when we think about how we, again, not make this a moment, but a movement, it really is about getting in the federal government agencies and aligning in a much different way than we have in the past. There are many dollars out there, whether that be consultancy arrangements, fee for service, or strict research projects that HBCUs not only need to be engaged in, but need to be the prime on. Often we are the subs on some of these, we need to be the prime on them. And the federal government requires a plan each year for ongoing development and support. We need to make sure that that plan is real, continues to be measured every year, and that there are real some expectations for some things to get done. I know the president, just as one point, is laser focused on one of these R2s, and from the HBCU community, or a couple of them getting to R1 status. That means broader, more clearer, more intentional support and opportunity from the federal government, particularly on the research side.
Dr. Frederick, any thoughts to add to that?
No, I think Dr. Allen is actually helping HBCUs galvanize around kind of the support from the federal government in making those asks. I think organizations like Thurgood Marshall College Fund has done a really great job of helping to bring our college presidents, our HBCU presidents together to make those really, really significant asks of the federal government and how they support us. So I think he covered pretty much all of that in his comments.
I think we can probably sneak one more question in there. We have a question sort of focused on mentorship, teaching and learning. One of our listeners wrote, I suspect that education from HBCUs has traditionally been high touch. Has the recent pandemic that may have resulted in a lower touch delivery caused you to look at your model any differently? Dr. Federick, any thoughts on that?
You know, one of the things I truly believe is that it for me, it made me realize how important that high touch is, how important it is for our students to be successful. And again, it's not just one thing, it's the whole picture for our students from K through 12 into college, that they may need a little bit of extra support. And again, it's not extra support in that they're not prepared. It is just making sure that they understand that college and getting this additional education is their right to get it. And so the high touch, I think, helps support that. You know, we have thought a lot around the online environment, and we had already started in that space as well. But to be honest, I hope we never get away from having that touch, that interaction with our students that helps them understand that they are important in this environment. So not completely rethinking that model, but thinking about how we can augment it is always top of mind.
Just real quickly, we see in students, like you think of digital touch, and so you can think of digital virtual, but digital hand, that hand on the back and the hand up. And in a 2018 survey on mentoring nationally, we found equivalent levels of reports of having a mentor amongst Black and non-Black students, white students in particular. But the white students on campuses, this is nationally representative, had faculty. And the Black students had staff, somebody else, someone off campus, somewhere else. And so this touch, right? And we see you and we feel you, and you can be me and I can be you. It's just so powerful, as Dr. Federick has expressed. So it's a model of best practices that we need to continue.
Yeah. And if I can add one more thing, I would actually like to see us expand that touch into that mental health space. Because that's one of the things I think absolutely, again, it showed that we weren't caring for that as much. And maybe still not doing it as well as we need to do it, but that mental health space and making sure that it is a priority for our students, our faculty and staff, I think is one of the things that really just showed very well during the pandemic, that we got to invest more time, resources in that space as well.
Really appreciate that point about mental health. Dr. Allen, any thoughts on HBCU's high touch model?
You know, it's hard to add anything to Dr. Federick's eloquence. It is the one thing I would say is when you think about why HBCU students are coming to HBCUs, yes, they're coming for a high quality education, but they're also coming to change their life trajectory for themselves, their families, and their communities. So they see us as a home in many respects. And sometimes that's as real could be. We have during the pandemic, we found out very quickly that we had about 200 students on campus who were otherwise homeless without Delaware State University. So when you think about the psychosocial supports that we need to continue to invest in, because I'm not sure we're there yet, in addition to that base ring of Maslow's hierarchy of needs relative to physical safety, it's really, really important that we always maintain what is really a broader community of people who we want to be with us and feel like we're family all the time, from the moment they've walked into the university to the moment they begin a family and are encouraging other people to join the university community and the broader HBCU community for that matter. That that may sound a little soft, but I actually think it's critically important. And I think the research that David just reviewed suggests that the material results of that part of our business are just as important as the quality education they receive.
I feel like this discussion could span another hour and a whole day and days, but unfortunately we're reaching the end of our time. But I want to say thank you so much to our panelists for joining us for this insightful discussion, and to everyone listening today. We hope that it's been valuable. And piece of housekeeping, the recording of this webinar and the slide deck will be shared with all of you via email tomorrow. And thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.